In the winter of 1348, as the Black Death turned the paved streets of Genoa into open graves, a single candle burned in the highest tower of the monastery of St. Jude. Down below, the world was ending. Empires were crumbling into dust, families were vanishing in a week, and the stench of decay hung over the sea like an iron curtain. But inside that tower, a man named Brother Anselm was creating a world that would outlive them all. Anselm was not an ordinary monk. He was a cartographer, a master of ink, pigskin parchment, and gold leaf. Kings paid him in rubies just for a glimpse of his atlases. To the monarchs of Europe, Anselm was not just drawing land. He was defining reality. Where his pen marked a river, armies marched. Where he drew a coast, armadas set sail. If Anselm put a crown over a city, that city belonged to God. For 30 years, Anselm had mapped the known world. He mapped the crags of Scotland, the sands of the Levant, and the spice ports of Alexandria. But Anselm possessed a dangerous affliction, one shared by every artist who has ever looked into the dark. He hated the blank spaces. On medieval maps, the unexplored edges of the earth were left empty, tagged only with the terrifying warning, "Here be dragons." To Anselm, those white spaces were not a warning. They were an insult. In the second year of the plague, the Grand Duke of Tuscany commissioned Anselm for his masterwork, a map of the far, untamed East, beyond the Silk Road, beyond the reach of Christendom. The Duke wanted to know what lay past the Great Desert, what wealth, what empires, what lands were waiting to be conquered. Anselm waited for the travelers. He waited for the merchants, the diplomats, the battered survivors of Eastern caravans to bring him accounts of the lands beyond the horizon. But no one came. The plague had severed the veins of the world. The roads were quiet. The desert was silent. Anselm was left alone in his tower, staring at a massive, blank expanse of vellum 3 meters wide. The Duke was growing impatient. His gold had already been spent on ink made of crushed lapis lazuli and pulverized vermilion. That was the night Anselm broke. He dipped his quill into the dark ink, and instead of waiting for truth, he began to invent. It started with a line, a graceful, curving river he named the Valus. He drew it winding down from mountains he forged out of thin air, the whispering peaks. At the foot of those mountains, he drew a city, not a village of mud and straw, but a sprawling, shimmering metropolis of ivory towers and copper gates. He named it Oros Kale. He did not stop there. The madness of creation took hold of him. Driven by fever, solitude, and the horror of the dying world outside his window, Anselm spent 3 years crafting an empire out of pure illusion. He named it the realm of Solvale. He didn't just map its geography, he gave it a soul. In the margins of the parchment, he wrote out its history in minute, elegant script. He invented 300 years of dynasties, detailed their laws, described their religious rites, and noted the exact locations of their gold mines. He drew trade routes lined with pearls and silk. He invented cities of glass, forests of blue wood, and harbor fortresses that could withstand 1,000 ships. To make it believable, he gave it flaws. He drew treacherous reefs off its southern coast. He mapped barren wastes within its borders. He added small, tragic details. A ruin marked the fall of Heth, a sunken bay named the Grief of Queens. When the map was finished, it was the most magnificent work of art the medieval world had ever seen. The gold leaf gleamed like sunrise. The blue ink of the ocean was as deep as the sea itself. It was breathtaking. It was perfect. And it was a complete and utter lie. When Anselm delivered the map to the Grand Duke, the court fell silent. Nobles wept at its beauty. Bishops praised God for revealing such splendor to mankind. The Duke touched the gold leaf over the city of Oros Kale and whispered, "It is the garden of the earth." Anselm meant to tell him. He opened his mouth to say, "My lord, it is only a poem. It is a dream to comfort us while the plague burns." But when he saw the wonder in the Duke's eyes, when he saw how desperately these men needed to believe in a world untainted by rot and death, the words died in his throat. He took his gold, returned to his monastery, and closed the door. He thought the story would end there. He was wrong. Ideas, once unleashed into the hearts of men, possess a gravity that no truth can resist. Within 5 years, copies of Anselm's map had spread across the continent. The Empire of Solval became an obsession for the rulers of Europe. In 1356, the King of Aragon dispatched a fleet of 12 galleys carrying 2,000 soldiers and 300 colonists to lay claim to the ivory city of Oros Cael. They carried Anselm's map in a silver casing. They never returned. 4 of the ships broke against real, unmarked rocks in the uncharted waters of the south. The rest drifted into the dead calm of the tropics, their crews dying of thirst while hunting for a river that existed only in the mind of a dying monk. 2 years later, an army of 3,000 mercenaries set off across the eastern steppe to find the silver mines of Solvale. They marched into the frozen wastes of Central Asia, guided by Anselm's meticulously drawn mountain passes. They were swallowed by blizzards. Only 11 men survived to tell the tale. For 2 decades, the ghost of Solvale devoured lives. Expeditions vanished into the deep ocean. Kings bankrupted their treasuries. Families sold their estates to fund voyages to a paradise carved from delusion. Inside his tower, Anselm aged. Every time news reached the monastery of another lost ship, another starved expedition, Anselm felt a cold blade twist in his chest. He had not drawn dragons to keep men away. He had drawn beauty, and beauty had turned out to be far more lethal. In the winter of 1374, an old man pounded on the monastery gates. He was a former captain, one of the few who had returned from the southern seas. His skin was burned black by the sun, his eyes were milky with cataracts, and his limbs were scarred by scurvy. He requested an audience with the great cartographer. Anselm received him in his cold study. The captain pulled a frayed, water-stained piece of parchment from his coat, a copy of Anselm's map. With trembling, calloused fingers, the captain pointed to the imaginary harbor of Oros Cael. "I spent 20 years searching for this city, Father," the captain whispered, his voice like dry leaves. "I lost my brother to the waves. I lost my youth to the sun. I sacrificed everything to find this shore." Anselm looked at the broken man before him, the weight of 1,000 drowned souls resting on his shoulders. Tears welled in the old monk's eyes. "My son," Anselm wept, dropping to his knees. "Forgive me. There is no ivory city. There are no copper gates. I made it all up. It was ink." Just ink and vanity. The captain stared at him for a long, agonizing moment. Then, to Anselm's horror, the old sailor began to laugh. A dry, hollow, terrifying laugh. "You think you made it up?" the captain whispered, leaning in close. "No, Father. You didn't invent it. You summoned it." The captain pressed the map into Anselm's hands. "We didn't find the city of Ivory," the captain said, "but we found the wreck of the king's fleet on the rocks you drew. We found the graves of the soldiers in the desert you named. We found the bones of thousands of men, resting precisely where your ink hit the page." The captain leaned back into the shadows. "You mapped an empire that didn't exist, Master Anselm. But by the time we finished looking for it, we built its graveyard out of our own blood." Brother Anselm died 3 days later. That night, the monks found his tower engulfed in flames. He had locked himself inside with every map, every chart, and every scrap of parchment he had ever drawn. When the ashes cooled, nothing remained of his workshop. Yet, if you look at certain rare sea charts from the late 14th century, hidden in the dark corners of Vatican libraries, you will still find a vast, empty stretch of ocean in the Far East. And in the center of that blue void, written in a faint, trembling hand, are 6 words that no sailor ever dared to ignore again. Do not look for this place.